back to Classics in Ancient Mediterranean Studies 1103. Name that tune. Enjoy the lecture.
All right, so now we're done with the heavy metrical lifting, and we get finally to the fun part of what it means to be Ovid, the strangely epic poet. We can draw a line directly from that moment at the very beginning of Book 1, when Ovid is himself the first metamorphosis of the metamorphoses at the hands of the gods, and by implication at the hands of Augustus, to a moment later in Book 1 when the first obvious metamorphosis of the metamorphoses occurs. That's the metamorphosis of evil King Lycaon into a wolf for having tried to sacrifice, and it's implied very strongly, eat Jove, that is Jupiter, and Mercury, whom we also know as Hermes. Jupiter, of course, we also know as Zeus. Here's the way that takes shape on page 6 of the Melville translation. When Jove from his high tower beheld men's crimes, he groaned, and mindful of that loathsome feast, Lycaon set, new crime then known to few, in mighty anger blazed, celestial wrath befitting Jupiter, and called the gods to conclave, urgent summons soon obeyed. Across the height of heaven there runs a road, clear when the night is bare, the Milky Way, famed for its sheen of white. Along this way come the immortals to the royal halls of the great Thunderer. On either hand the mansions of the aristocracy are thronged, their doors flung wide. The common sort live in the scattered suburbs. Here reside the great and famous. This majestic place, to speak so bold, is heaven's Palatine. The key here is the reference to the Palatine at the end, heaven's Palatine, that is. The real Palatine is the hill in Rome, one of the famous hills of Rome, where Augustus lived. Here in the early going, it can't but seem flattering to have the emperor compared to the king of the universe. But very quickly, things get more complicated than that. At any rate, there's a very basic dynamic that I want to just point out before we move onward, which is Ovid constantly brings the ancient mythology, which above all comes from Greece, into the present by juxtaposing ancient mythological elements with elements that come from his immediate cultural context. That is, when you say that Olympus, or a certain part of Olympus, is heaven's Palatine, what you've done is to take the archaic mythic stuff and bring it into the present. And what we're going to see is that that can be played for satire and indeed humor, and that it has a really strong and fun correspondence to a technique in modern mythic storytelling. For the moment, though, let's proceed with this same story and take a look at the way Jupiter is acting on the next page, on page 7, where again he is explicitly compared to a Roman political figure. And here Jupiter is talking about the various divine powers in the world below, whom he at least claims to be protective of, the nymphs and the fauns and the satyrs. Top of page 7. Can you suppose them safe when against me, whom the lightnings, whom yourselves obey, Lycaon plots his treacherous devilry? An angry murmur rose. The gods, outraged for sin, demand fit doom. So, when the blood of Caesar by mad impious hands was spilt to expunge the name of Rome, the human race and all creation shuddered, dazed with fear of instant ruin. Nor dost thou rejoice, Augustus, in thy subjects' loyalty less than great Jove in his, whose gesture then and voice rebuked their noise, and silence fell, their clamor hushed by his grave majesty, and Jove again with speech the silence broke. Again, at first this seems flattering, but when you think about what Jupiter is doing here, and we're going to go on in just a moment and see where that's exemplified, you begin to realize that the comparison which Ovid makes between Jupiter's subjects and Augustus' subjects cuts two ways. If, in fact, Augustus doesn't rejoice any more than Jupiter does, and Jupiter shouldn't rejoice because his subjects are basically just yes men who will rubber stamp any atrocious decision that Jupiter makes, then maybe Augustus is the same way. All right, so here's what Jupiter uses the ascent of his assembled divinities to do. And now we're on page 8. So one house died, but not one house alone deserves to die. In the whole world sin reigns, conspiracy of crime. Soon on them all my sentence stands, due punishment shall fall. Many are loud in favor of Jove's speech, and spur his anger. Many give quiet assent, but all deplore the loss of humankind. It's the sadness about losing humankind and the quiet assent that are the most important things here, because with it, Ovid refers to something that was going on in the Senate at the time when Augustus was ramming through all of this more or less fascist legislation, particularly the moral legislation. There were lots of people who disagreed, but by their silence let the legislation go through. And so that quiet assent thing is Ovid's dig both at Augustus and at the senators who let Augustus have everything he wanted in the Senate. And all of a sudden Jupiter, who is about to wipe out all of humanity for the crimes of one guy, doesn't look like quite the best ruler one could possibly have. In the next segment, I'll make what I think is a very, very fun comparison of this use of ancient myth to make a comment on modern life in Ovid, which isn't just in Book 1, but goes all the way through all 15 books of the Metamorphoses, with what I think is a very similar mythic move in a modern film.